All right, so it's a couple of minutes after 9. I don't know that we're going to get that many more, so why don't we start the meeting? I'll call the meeting to order, and we can certainly follow up as necessary. So please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, since it's not a board meeting, there's only one agenda item. Even though the agenda list approval of agenda, there's no approval necessary. So we'll move forward to public comments. Let me make one comment. For those of you attending the meeting, please keep your microphones on mute so we don't hear any background noise. And feel free. There is a function within Teams to raise your hand. If you don't feel that that's working or you're getting recognized, just unmute your microphone and ask to be recognized, and we can certainly follow through on that. Second thing is public comments. Certainly, since it's not a board meeting, it's just a hearing. Certainly, public comments are welcomed. I suspect they're probably better suited after we start the budget discussion, but certainly the floor is now open for any public comments that want to be made at this time. And for those in attendance, are you comfortable with the process on how to make a public comment? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move into the only item that we have on our agenda, and that is the budget discussion. It's pretty straightforward. We've done this in the past. Unfortunately, we've not done this in the past in a virtual mode, so this will be a first. And I know it's a little more cumbersome. It's a little more difficult, but at the same time, we wanted to honor the fact that, by our governing documents, we're required to make sure that the membership is aware of where we are in the budget process. And again, let me reiterate that this is not a final budget. We are still in the process of refining it. We're still in the process of getting input, analyzing it from an operations perspective, from a board perspective, and from a membership perspective. So any questions, any comments, any concerns are absolutely encouraged. If you weren't able, and I'm saying this because this meeting is being recorded, if you weren't able to attend this meeting, I encourage you to send an email to directors@oceanpines.org. The board will get that message, and we will respond accordingly to make sure that we address any concerns or any questions you might have regarding the budget. So other than, presenting the information, two things. Number one, the budget in its current form is on the OPA website. You can navigate to that. You'll have all the information that we currently have with regard to the status of the budget at this point in time. So if there are any specific questions that are associated with it, we will certainly address those. What I'm going to do right now is I am going to share my screen, and hopefully everybody can see my screen right now. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to move right down to the one that everybody is familiar with. It's probably on top of mind for anyone, and that is where we are with the current assessment based on the analysis from the Budget and Finance Committee, based on the analysis by the GM and his operations staff, and based on the analysis by the Board of Directors. By no means is this a final budget. Let me reiterate that. Part of the reason we have this particular hearing is to gather some input, in a public arena, so that everybody's aware of any questions, concerns that the membership may have regarding the budget. So at this point, we're looking at an assessment for the non-water lots of $1,021, which, as previously noted, is about a $35 increase from last year's assessment. And rather than reading all through it, you can see how the rates have been changed from last year to the new proposed assessment rates for the specific lots that are listed here. So I think that is the main question, although I would hope that others would have some question regarding how things are broken down. Just so, and I'm going back to the regular comparison here, most people will realize, and see where I think the biggest thing that I would point out to folks is that in our, 21, and last year's budget, projected revenue was 14.7 million, this year, and then with the forecast changed with, certain factors that happened during the operating year. And then the current budget, we're projecting the revenue at 14.06, which is about $1 million under where we were last year with regard to projected revenues. On the expenditure side, if you look at where we budgeted expenses, of 14.7 back in last fiscal year. We projected actually a number under that for the remainder of this fiscal year to finish out the current fiscal year. And the GM and his staff, I want to point out, have done a very good job in looking at controlling the expenses. We're actually underneath even where we're projected to finish in this current fiscal year, to a savings of about $500,000. So kudos to John. I want to point that out too, that I think John, Steve Phillips, his finance team, and the rest of his operations team do a very good job in understanding that, controlling the costs is a real important factor in the operations, but not to control the costs or cut costs just for the sake of cutting costs, or that a cutting of a cost would impact a service that's currently being provided, but being very careful about things that they can control. And I think they've done a pretty good job. That's always on top of mind for John Viola, the GM, and his finance team, as well as the board. We're very sensitive to any increases in the assessment, although, as we all know, as time goes on, things go up. It's more expensive to do certain things, and we just try to make sure that we're very sensitive to any projected increases in the assessment. So from that point, and I was hoping that Steve Phillips was going to attend the meeting because he may have some other perspectives. But at this point, I really want to open the floor to the membership for any questions they may have regarding this budget, anything overall regarding the budget, because that's really what this hearing's all about. We want to hear what the public has to say, and maybe help us guide us to some other things to consideration before we approve the final budget. So let me go back, and I am going to go back to my regular screen here. Okay. So I believe I have stopped. Are we back on the regular? Can everybody see me now?
Yes.
All right. So again, part of the reason for this meeting, it's wide open. The agenda says budget discussion, and it's meant to be a discussion amongst the membership. Again, with the board and the members of the finance team to say, here's the budget where it is right now. What kinds of concerns, questions we have that we can be available to answer for you, or at least if we don't have an answer for you, go out and reference check it and make sure that we do find an answer for you. So again, this is more of a membership meeting, and I'm hoping that folks from the membership that have any questions will certainly submit them, and we can have an open discussion on it. So again, the floor is open for any discussions regarding the budget, any questions, and so on and so forth. So I see.
David Tanner here. Just a quick question about the golfing. I've been reading about this issue regarding the possibly getting wastewater from water from the wastewater plant.
Yeah.
And are installing a new sprinkler system that may be connected to that. Is that something that the board is looking at doing anyway in terms of putting in a new sprinkler system, and has that been budgeted?
The answer right now is no. We're not looking at putting in any new sprinkler system, nor are there any expenses in this budget associated with a new sprinkler system. However, if memory serves me correct, the county has approved some money in their budget to do the research and the analysis to see how viable the use of treated water on the golf course would be to the operation. So I know that's in place. As far as a time frame goes, I'd have to go back and take a look, but I know that was discussed at the county level. But again, from an OPA budget perspective, there are no expenses associated with any of that in this year's budget.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Well, interestingly enough, just so we only have 11 people in this meeting, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us are board members. So, again, I know it's difficult, and I suspect, and I'd shared this with my board colleagues, that there's probably some level of reluctance to do things virtually, just because it's a new technology, and just you don't have the same comfort level that you would have if we were in a face-to-face meeting, say in the Assateague room. Although, again, being respectful of the COVID restrictions, we'd want to make sure we wouldn't want to put anybody at risk, and therefore just we had to go virtually. But so given the fact that there's not a lot of attendance. And I really do, since we're being, although Frank's getting ready to ask a question, I do want to make sure, reiterate the fact that if the membership has questions, please, we encourage you to send information to directors@oceanpines.org and give us an opportunity to hear the questions and get the research and get an answer for you. Frank, did you have something?
No, what I was going to say, Doug, is, given the lack of questions, okay, one issue but however, given that I see that some of the media is here, one of the things I think we should talk about is drainage, and very specifically, 2 items on drainage. In the current year that will end in April, we've budgeted more money for drainage than we had in the past 5 years combined. This year, upcoming, the budget that's currently under discussion, we have budgeted, if I recall the number correctly, $900,000, which is like 3 or 4 times the amount that we budgeted this year. Okay, so drainage is a big issue, but one of the things that I'm not sure that we have, I think the membership needs visibility to, is this underground pipe issue. Because we have, like, as I recall, I'm looking at my notes from Eddie and from John Viola, we have basically, let's see here, 30,647 feet of underground pipe that ranges in age from when the community started to, let's just say recently, okay? Mm-hmm. The average lifespan of an underground corrugated pipe is very broad. It ranges from 10 to 40 years. But even at 40 years, a significant number of those pipes are mid to end service life. It costs $1,000 a foot to replace an underground corrugated pipe based on our current bids. Now, the issue is, what is the liability, discussing the liability there. Plus, I understand that there's a repair technique that they're looking at. I'm uncertain as to if we know what the cost of that is and when that may be available to us, because that sounds like a preventive maintenance program similar to what we run on bulkheads. So can that be addressed, or is that was that outside of the current budget discussions?
I think it's certainly outside the details, outside the current budget discussion, but you bring up a very good point. And I think the membership needs to understand that, and I'm speaking in very generalistic terms here, but people say drainage, and rightfully so. I'd take the same approach. Like, well, how does it affect me personally? In other words, I have either a backyard that's gets filled with water during a rainstorm, or my ditch doesn't really drain within 48 hours. It's one of those things where, Frankie, you bring up a good point, is that the infrastructure is pretty old, and if you look at that calculation, the amount of money it would take to completely revamp the infrastructure is beyond what we could reasonably consider, even in over a 5-year span. You do that number, you're talking $30-40 million. But the question from drainage is, it's always on top of mind. From a personal perspective, I think it's I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but my concern is that we spend money on drainage, and we absolutely must. And I look at it from 2 perspectives. One would be the infrastructure. The other would be the ditches and the grading and sort of the above ground things that need to be done. But and I'll take a particular circumstance on my street. My neighbor doesn't live here full time. I always clear out their ditch and their leaves, and I do mine and my neighbor next door, and it's fine. And however, 3 doors down from me, there's a non-full-time resident, and between the branches, the leaves, and other debris that get into the drain pipe underneath their driveway, that in the ditch, everything stops right there. So, at this point, I was having a discussion with somebody, and they said, well, I said, we could spend X amount of dollars on drainage and it wouldn't fix your problem, and they'd be right. And so that's the conundrum that we have with regard to drainage. I think that the GM, Eddie, and the public works folks have an idea of where the problem areas are, and we're budgeting to that aspect of it. But my concern for the long term is, my guess, and this is just a guess on my part, just pure conjecture, is that we'll probably spend a whole lot of time on fixing problem areas. And, maybe the cumulative effect of that would be to over time correct the entire infrastructure. But I suspect more time will be done just kind of focusing on that one-time problem area, fixing it, and then moving on to the next problem area. I think that will consume both the available labor resources and the available funding for doing something like that. But, we have to stay on top of it. It's something that really needs to be addressed. And, the GM, that we know about it, and the idea of funding it appropriately over time clearly is something that's going to be, I don't want to call it a challenge, but certainly something that we need to keep at top of mind. Larry, you had a question? Oh, Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I agree with what you're saying 100%. Let me just kind of give you background. The reason I asked some detailed questions of John and Public Works on drainage, because to be honest with everybody, I was in COVID-19 quarantine, right? I couldn't be there in person. But, they say trust your eyes. So I will tell you, I moved into my house in 2013, and I have a ditch in front of my house, behind my house, and 2 doors down, a side ditch. And in the first years that I moved in, there was hardly ever any water in those ditches. This past season and over time, I've noticed the ditch gets more water accumulation. And over the last couple of storms, it almost has spilled over into the yard and onto Ocean Parkway. So the question that I asked was, what kind of maintenance do we have? Because my feeling was, I've never seen anybody from Ocean Pines work on a ditch in front, behind, or 2 doors down. And the response that I got is some areas don't need attention. And I understand why, because we're spending so much time in the problem areas. The problem with that is, as you spend more and more time and money in the problem areas, your problem areas grow if you're not paying attention to other areas. And the numbers that I asked regarding just routine maintenance would be if we put the ditches and the bulkheads under some kind of scheduled maintenance similar to that we do with bulkheads, the numbers have a very substantial increase in the assessment. And that is not including the pipe failures. And the conclusion that I came to is, if you really maintain ditches regularly and maintain the failed infrastructure, you could be looking at substantial increases in the assessment over time, and you still haven't solved the basic problem of the problem homes, the 2,500 problem homes, because that requires programs that we haven't even discussed yet, aside from maybe expanding Bainbridge Pond. And those are huge expenditures, I think, as we all know. So the alert is, there's no immediate problem, and nobody needs to run around with their hair on fire. But over the next decade or two, we're going to be facing substantial infrastructure issues that cost a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so noted. Hey, Larry, you had a question? Moment.
Yeah, just a couple of things on this. First, Frank talked about the process for extending the life of the pipes. The process is there's a company that will come in and put a lining on the inside of the pipes. I know John and Eddie and Nobi have met with the guy here in Ocean Pines. I believe it's a company from Louisiana, but they do work all over the country. And they reviewed some of our issues, and they can help us. However, they haven't gotten back to John with a price as to what it would be. So I think the thought process is if with the money that we're budgeting, if we have to replace pipes, then the ones that have to be replaced are replaced. But if we can add these linings into the ones that exist, we actually will get more work done because it should be a lower cost. So that's sort of where we are with the linings and the pipes. Second thing is, and Frank brings up a good point, the ditch maintenance. As we discussed in the other budget sessions, we've had open positions in public works that we've been trying to fill for years, and we just can't seem to fill them. And if you remember a few years ago, we added 3 positions. I think it was 3 positions back to public works to do exactly that, do ditch maintenance. We can't seem to hire the people to get it done. I know John was using an outside company to do some of that work, but they're not doing it. I don't believe they're doing it for us anymore because they have enough of their own work to do. So that's where that situation is too, from my understanding. And then on Doug, the comments you made regarding the ditches, when we had that horrendous rainstorm and Bainbridge area was flooded, I went over there while the people were cleaning out. And that's the comment I got from most of the people that I talked to on the street, is that if individuals would keep their just the ditches in the front of their house, the swales, cleared, things would work much better. And you could see that, their biggest complaint was the people that don't do anything, or that the homes that are rental properties, and then if there are storms or when the leaves fall, that people just blow that stuff into the ditches, expecting Ocean Pines Public Works people to get it out for them. And for us to do that, as Frank mentioned, on a continuous basis, I mean, we just don't have the budget or the manpower to do all of that work. So it's the whole drainage system. It is exactly that. It's a system. It flows from one property to the next, in the front and the back generally, and in some cases on the sides. But if the ditches are jammed, if there's debris in there, the water's going to back up and it just stops the whole system. So, Ocean Pines has a lot of responsibility here, to keep things moving too, but our homeowners have to understand that they have a big part of it also. And, it's one of these things where we can do our part, but our homeowners need to do their part too.
Yeah, Larry, that's very consistent with all the comments that I had in discussions with members in Ocean Pines. The same thing. It's that they realize that, it does take sort of a community to get all this done. I mean, I do my neighbors because he's not physically able to do so. It's just something that I do. I don't even blink. I just take care of it. But I'm sure there are a number of properties out there, and you mentioned another one, rental properties, or people that that are not there full time. That's where the quote unquote system, sort of, I don't call it fails, but certainly runs into problems. But I don't know how you solve that other than awareness, an awareness program that, maybe we can push something like that and try to get that into the sphere of consciousness, if you will, of the membership, to understand that it is a sort of a community affair to address this drainage thing. But I think at the end of the day, Frank, the idea of 2 points that I want to make sure the membership is aware of, that number one, the board and the GM are aware of the drainage problem. Number two, that there has been some progress regarding we'll just call things that are relevant to the maintenance. In other words, we talked about the lining the pipes and so on and so forth. So there's some effort there. Has it yielded any positive results just yet? No, it's in the planning stages right now, but it is something that the board and the general manager, are looking at to address both a current and a longer term problem. Any other questions from the membership?
No, but Doug,
Right.
One other point. I think that the other thing, given the lack of membership interest, would be good for both you and your role to address and Larry to address, is the uncertainty that we face going into this budget year, given that we won't have, in all probability, a paycheck protection plan that Ocean Pines qualifies for, and just the risk, the general topic of the risk involved.
Yeah, and if the folks here at the meeting or the folks that watch this meeting later were in attendance, or at least were aware of the discussions that were had at the budget review and at the board review of the budget, the Budget and Finance Committee review of the budget and the board review of the budget, there was a risk that was introduced with regard to COVID. It's unknown. Nobody can predict where we will be in May, in August, in October of this year and the other months into the upcoming fiscal year. The idea was to at least look at a balance. I think John did a very good job. John, the general manager, and his team did a very good job in looking at let's look at what we've traditionally done without the risk of COVID, as in shutting down the amenities, the ability to generate revenue at those amenities based on the code restrictions. And he also put in another part that said but his contingency would be if we were able to be reduced of the available revenue by X%. Here's where I would look at adjusting the budget. So John is aware of that, but I think the important part is, and John used the word balance. I love that word too. You have to look at the sort of the far end of absolute risk and the far end, absolute, nothing's going to happen. So you have to find a happy medium there, which says, I realize that we may not be so restrictive that we'll run into the same revenue challenges that we did this year, but nor am I going to say I'm overly optimistic that all restrictions will be lifted and we'll get back to normal. So we're looking at somewhere in the middle. That's where, and I think that's also part of managing the budget in real time. Those kinds of things are unpredictable. You're aware of them, but until you get a tangible evidence of something actually happening, you just got to be aware of the fact that maybe you're err on the side of being a little more conservative with your spending, knowing that some of the things may not open up as they will. But again, I think it's important that the membership know that the idea of COVID, the potential restrictions associated with COVID, were certainly kept into consideration when this budget was prepared.
Yeah, let me just add a little bit to that too, Doug. The if you sat in on the budget hearings, excuse me, we have a pretty good idea on a couple of the areas of what we think will happen. First off, golf. We have a pretty good idea that golf should do much better this coming year, even with the COVID restrictions that are in place, than it did last year because the course was shut down. The courses all over are now open and there's no anticipation that they would be shut down. So last year we lost the whole spring package season. And we don't anticipate losing that this year. However, we don't know how much of that will not occur because people are not traveling. So that's some of the type of things that we just don't know. Beach parking was a big deficit for us this year. I think we're probably, I think initially we thought, well, maybe if the vaccination process got rolled out quickly, that may be better than last year. We're all seeing how slowly this process is going. My gut feeling is, and it's just mine, that we may end up about the same place this year as we did last year with the beach parking. The other big area is aquatics, and we've talked about that during the budget process. Aquatics got hit real hard last year. And again, it's nobody's fault. It's the COVID-19 problem and the restrictions that were placed on the pools. At this point, from my perspective, again, this is just my perspective, that we probably should be looking at a similar situation with the pools this coming year. However, we don't know. So the budget numbers that we have put forward do not include that adjustment for COVID. And John's analysis was that if we added in what we thought the COVID adjustment should be, it would be another $77 to the assessment. So fortunately, the other issue here is we're projecting a surplus at this point for this year. So if we do, from a budgetary standpoint, if we don't do as well as we thought we've budgeted for, there should be some retained earnings on our balance sheet to cover some of that. And I know that's getting down into the weeds a little bit, but these are the thought processes and discussions that are occurring with the board, with Steve Phillips and John and Doug and myself on how we manage this. And the honest answer is we managed through it last year. We've got a whole different set of circumstances this year because things could get better this year. But then again, we don't know. So I think that sort of addresses the COVID issue. Again, the reality of it is we don't have all the answers. We're trying to make the best guesses that we can and try to manage to the best way that we can.
Good. Question from Mr. Tanner.
Yeah, not so much a question, but just a suggestion on that. The same vein as to budget is I would recommend that we consider deferring capital expenses till later in the year, till we see how the year goes, rather than start off with them right away, just as a means to conserve cash and again, see how the year goes and do them later in the year if the year turns out as we hope it will, but keep it in the bank to save some money if it doesn't.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. Several of us have already talked about it. Since we passed the capital requests from the GM at the January meeting, where there's no time frame involved in that, but certainly the inference is we would spend it as soon as reasonably possible. But based on some conversations we've had in the past couple of days, Mr. Tanner, that approach is one of the things we're considering. Should we do it at this point in time? Should we sort of manage as retained earnings that will carry into the next fiscal year based on the uncertainty of COVID restrictions and the effect on revenue? So are these absolutely critical to the running of the operation? Are these capital expenses critical to the operation? They're certainly needed, but I believe we have the flexibility to defer them to another point in time. And the matter is, what's the best way to defer them? But again, that discussion is being had right now. So that idea is consistent with what we're talking about right now. Larry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we did this year, Mr. Tanner. To give you an example, we had two playgrounds to be replaced in Ocean Pines, and both of those projects were put on hold until December, when we had a little better idea of where we were going to be with our budget this year. We went ahead and signed a contract to replace one of the playgrounds, but not the other. So we are looking at those type of things, and from a cash flow standpoint, yes, that's the way to go. However, just so you're clear and you understand, we have our reserves we're doing fairly well with our reserves. We don't want to have to tap into them if without it being an emergency, and we're planning not to tap into them and to try to manage through that without getting into our reserve dollars. But your point is well taken.
Frank, you had a comment?
Just a little add-on. As Larry said, John has a $77, I'll call it COVID risk factor, that he pointed out to us in the budget. I think the other thing that the community should at least be aware of, not be panicked by or not necessarily, run around with hair on fire, but the Paycheck Protection Plan effect in providing a shield to the average homeowner against an assessment increase that we took advantage of this year was $130 per home. That shield no longer exists. So as we go through not knowing what COVID's going to do, that risk is very real.
I think the other thing too, Frank, that's a good point. The other thing too is that, based on John having, we'll call it that $77 risk factor, is that the general sense was, okay, we could just do the path of least resistance and, or theory of minimum effort and say, hey, let's just put it in there because, we don't know that we'll have some return to normalcy. Well, that would put the burden on the membership to just fund something that, quite frankly, we might not need to fund. What happens if, if we do indeed turn the corner on the issue and are able to manage in a much more effective way? Now we've basically banked X amount of dollars from the membership that wasn't really needed. So the approach to say more conservative is, hey, we managed through this pandemic and we're fortunate enough to come out because of PPP with a surplus. We now know ahead of time that we're going to have to manage through. So rather than assume things are bad, we'll forego that $77 COVID related increase and basically be challenged as a team, as an operation to manage to that level, which we've done so already. So it's a good. I think that's something that I want to make sure the membership understands. That is that it wasn't a theory of minimum effort. It was something that, hey, we're not going to just throw that $77 in there because we could justify it. We're making sure that we create the budget in such a way that it manages, or we manage it to what we need, knowing that COVID could be a potential risk for us. So, other comments, questions? Okay, well, seeing none, again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, those of you who weren't able to attend that are either A, watching this meeting, or B, hear about it, please, I encourage you, if there's any questions, concerns about the budget, other things that you need to know, please send a message, an email to directors@oceanpines.org. We're anticipating getting some information. We'd love to make sure that everybody that needs information has it, and that there are no outstanding questions before we go through the final budget approval process. Again, the feedback is important, and making sure that if there's something that we do need to change prior to the final authorization of the budget, that we make sure we address that. And again, I just encourage everybody to provide any feedback should they need to. Mr. Tanner? Mr. Tanner, you're muted.
Just thank you to the board for doing this. This is the first time I've done this virtually, and I appreciate you guys making that effort and getting all the feedback and a little feedback way. I thought this worked really well doing it virtually. So thanks for spending some of your Saturday morning doing it. Appreciate it.
And thank you for attending. Any other final questions before we call for an adjournment? Floor's still open. All right. Well, thanks everybody for attending, my colleagues as well. Again, this meeting's been recorded, and we will continue, as I said, to address any questions we get emailed to us. Please enjoy the rest of your Saturday and the rest of your weekend. Stay safe. Thank you, everybody, for attending.